My name is Abigail Reynolds. I grew up in a devout Catholic home, where everything revolved around faith and deep religious values. My parents were devout believers, who raised me with a firm but loving spirit, instilling in me the belief that there was a greater meaning to life, and that I should dedicate my life to faith and service. From a young age I knew I was different. While other girls my age were preoccupied with dreams of love and relationships, I felt a deep calling to devote my life to God and community. People often noticed me, maybe because of my looks, with my long brown hair and bright eyes, or maybe because of my quiet demeanor and the steadfastness of my faith that I always tried to maintain. But I didn't mind the attention. I always tried to stay humble and focused on one goal: to be a nun, bringing comfort and hope to those who are suffering. Yet, as much as I tried to hold on to my faith, I also realized that I was still young and inexperienced with the world around me. Inside, I was still a girl with fragile emotions, easily swayed. Although I had chosen the path of religious life, the spiritual challenges I faced still left me shaken. At the time, I did not fully understand the resilience that religious life required. The dedication to my faith was not just a choice, but a severe test of the soul and steadfastness. When I first met Pastor Andrew Scott, I was just a woman filled with doubts, longing for a place to lean on. Andrew was a calm and devoted man of religion, who radiated an extraordinary peace. He often appeared with a calm smile, a calm gaze, and a gentle but powerful way of speaking. His devotion to his congregation, his ability to listen deeply, and his guiding counsel made me feel that I had found a guide. He is the one who can help me overcome the worries, doubts, and chaos I face every day. At first, I went to Andrew just to vent, hoping to find comfort in his teachings. He always took the time to listen to me with patience and never judged. He simply sat across from me, listening to things that I didn't even have the courage to say to anyone else. I felt like I could open up, expose all my weaknesses and turmoil in my heart without fear. I believed that he was the one God sent to help me find the path of light. As time went by, I gradually considered Andrew as someone close and trusted absolutely. I often attended the prayer meetings he organized, deeply felt each of his teachings, and found peace in the faith he taught. Andrew was like a spiritual father, helping me gradually release the obsessions in my heart. His presence in my life was like a guiding light, helping me get through each day with a sense of protection. But this closeness gradually opened up unexpected paths. As time passed, our conversations became more frequent and seemed to be more than just advice from a pastor to a parishioner. I can't say exactly when things began to change, but each look, each sentence gradually took on a different meaning. He looked at me not just as a believer in need of guidance, but as a close friend. The distances between us seemed to gradually blur, and in a moment of weakness, I found myself caught up in a whirlwind of vague and complicated emotions. One day, after a weekend service, I stayed at church later than usual. Andrew stood there, in the soft light of the lamp, his eyes fixed on me. There was no one else in the church, only silence. We sat down together, and I felt as if I had fallen into a space where only the two of us could be. Andrew no longer had his usual serious expression. He spoke of the pressures he too had endured, the sleepless nights and the moments of weakness he could not share with anyone. He spoke of the feeling of loneliness, a feeling I knew all too well. At that moment, all my defenses collapsed. I had always looked to him as a pillar of strength, but now I realized that he was just a human being like everyone else, with his own pain and struggles. My hand gently touched his, and for the first time I felt a strong pulse in his palm. It was a strange but not unfamiliar feeling, a connection that I never thought I would find here. The conversation gradually drifted away in a tense silence, but no one wanted to leave. By the time I left the church, I knew that the invisible boundary between us had been erased, leaving me with a strange emptiness. The next day I lied to myself that it was all just a temporary imagination, that all those feelings would pass. But the feeling did not disappear. Instead, it grew stronger, like a smoldering fire waiting for a moment to flare up. Gradually, our meetings became more private and personal. I began to realize that I was not just coming to Andrew for advice or comfort. I was coming to find him, to feel his presence. Not long after, my parents asked Andrew to come to their house to bless the family, because my mother had been unwell recently. They believed that his presence and prayers would bring good luck and peace. When I heard the news, my heart sank. I was both excited and nervous, not knowing how to face him in my own home. That day, I carefully prepared every detail for the ceremony. I tried to be calm, to make everything perfect, and not to show any signs of anxiety. When Andrew walked in, I felt as if time slowed down. Everything around me became blurry. He looked calm and serious, as he always did, but there was a look in his eyes that only I understood. He greeted my parents, his tone polite and solemn. He prepared himself quietly, placing each object on the small altar we had prepared, the flickering candlelight reflecting on his face. I stood beside him, keeping a safe distance but unable to stop the wavering in my heart. I felt his every move as a reminder of the deep conversations we had had, the emotions I had tried to keep hidden. The prayer began, and Andrew stood before the altar, bowing his head in prayer. His voice rang out deep and powerful, like a string leading me into another world, a world where there were only the two of us, even though everyone around was still listening. I felt as if each word of his prayer was piercing through me, touching the deepest corners of my soul. I stood there, heavy with hundreds of questions and regrets, but also unable to deny the secret longing that still burned. After the service, my parents asked Andrew to stay for dinner in the night since it was getting late. He nodded, agreeing with a calm smile, but only I knew that there was an undercurrent rising in his eyes. As everyone said goodbye and prepared for bed, the house gradually fell silent. My footsteps echoed softly on the wooden floor, my heart filled with emotions that I could not explain. Tonight, Andrew was in the living room, just a few steps away from mine. I felt like I was being pulled by an irresistible urge, an invisible pull that made me unable to stop thinking about him. As the night wore on, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. The ticking of the clock in my ears only added to the chaos in my mind. There was no longer any thought of right or wrong, only the intense feeling of something about to happen, something I had anticipated but did not want to fight against. In that moment, my reason had left me, leaving me weak, empty, and yearning for release. I quietly stood up, walking softly to the door of the living room, where Andrew was resting. My hand grasped the doorknob, but my heart was pounding as if it wanted to escape from my chest. I took a deep breath, then opened the door. There was no sound except my own rapid breathing. I entered the room in silence, the dim light from outside the window softening the space around us, but lighting a smoldering fire in my heart. Andrew looked up, his eyes meeting mine in the silence of the night. I did not need to say a word, just looking into his eyes. I knew he was as torn as I was. His eyes reflected the same feelings I was carrying, longing and torment. But in that moment, every boundary I had ever set for myself disappeared. I stepped closer to him, no longer distant, no longer rational. Andrew placed his hand on my shoulder, gently but seemingly breaking every principle and value we had ever held dear. His eyes softened, no longer the stern pastor in the pulpit I had once respected, but a man with longings, weaknesses, and desires. In that moment, we were two souls seeking comfort in each other, but also two people drowning in sin and longing. I cannot describe what I felt at that moment. Andrew, who I had once thought of as a symbol of faith and steadfastness, was now a man standing before me with very human emotions. I placed my hand on his chest, feeling each strong beat that seemed to mirror my own storm. We both knew what was happening, but neither of us had any intention of stopping. Without words, we let our emotions flow through our gazes, our breaths. His arms encircled me, gentle but possessive. I could feel his intense heartbeat, the storm raging inside us. I was no longer myself, and perhaps neither was Andrew. We were caught in a spiral that had no way out, a spiral that neither of us wanted to escape. I felt both safe and conflicted at that moment, as if I had waited my whole life for this moment. Being in his arms, I felt protected and closer than ever. But at the same time, I was also enveloped by a creeping regret, a feeling of betraying every belief, every ideal I had ever pursued. But then, my reason faded as he whispered in my ear, the deep voice that I had once admired now making me shiver. We both knew it was an unforgivable sin, but at the same time it was a moment we would never forget. That night I felt like I was lost in a maze of desire, where reason could not guide me. I cannot remember every detail, only that in his arms I left behind all moral barriers, all regrets. The long night passed in silence, neither of us said a word. There were only hugs, touches and long suppressed emotions. I don't know how long I had been lost, but when dawn gradually rose outside the window, I knew that I was no longer the person I was yesterday. That night, after we had completely lost our reason, in Andrew's arms, everything seemed to settle down. I fell asleep with a feeling of both peace and torment, not knowing that this night would be the turning point in my life. When the sky was still dark, I was still lying in his arms, feeling the calm rhythm of both of us after a long night of temptation and sin. But then, I heard a harsh sound, a loud noise that startled both Andrew and I awake. It was my father. He had seen us through the crack of the door, which had not been closed since last night. In that moment, fear and shock rose within me. My father stood there, his eyes wide open, filled with surprise and disappointment. He could not believe what he had just seen, and Andrew and I did not know what to do but look back at him in silence and fear. My father shouted, his voice resounding throughout the house, leaving both Andrew and I stunned, confused, not knowing how to face him. The air in the room seemed to freeze, his curses stabbed deep into my heart. I felt each knife stab into my heart, regret and shame welling up as I faced my father. Andrew stood there, head bowed, not saying a word, and I did not dare to look him in the eye. I understood how much I had disappointed him, broken all the trust and respect he had placed in me. My father did not say another word, but his eyes were filled with pain. He turned around and left in anger, leaving the two of us in absolute silence. We did not know what to do, did not know what to say, just stood there, painfully looking at each other with utmost torment. Andrew put his hand on my shoulder, gently as if to reassure me. But I felt like everything in my heart was breaking. For the next few days, I did not dare to step out of the room, did not dare to look at my father's face, feeling like I had lost all the trust he had for me. Andrew went to see my father, trying to explain and express that he would take responsibility for everything he had done, but my father did not want to hear a word. He just looked at Andrew silently, anger and disappointment clearly written on his face. It was not until Andrew said that he wanted to marry me, wanted to do his duty and would take care of me for the rest of his life, that my father temporarily listened. He asked the family to keep this a secret, so that no one would know the secret that we had both let slip. After many days of hesitation, after many thoughts and hesitations, my father finally agreed to Andrew's proposal. I know this decision was not easy for him. A part of his heart still could not forgive us, but he tried to force himself to accept. After everything calmed down, Andrew and I officially held our wedding, even though we both knew that we would have to face prying eyes, gossip about our age and the difference between us. But through it all, I felt Andrew's love for me, his determination to make up for it, and bring me happiness, something I did not expect to have after all the events that had happened. Our wedding took place in a simple but warm atmosphere. Although there were always whispers and suspicious looks from people around us, we decided to overcome all difficulties and challenges together. Andrew became my life partner, the one I could rely on in my weakest moments, and also the one who was willing to give up everything to stand by me, despite opposition and scorn from all sides. Although my father reluctantly accepted, I knew that in his heart he still could not completely forgive me. That was something that I always tormented myself about, but it was also the motivation for me to try to prove that I would live happily, and be worthy of Andrew's sacrifice, as well as the tolerance that my father had given me. After the wedding, Andrew and I began our new life with many challenges. We had to face scrutiny and gossip from the community. Although Andrew was a respected pastor, he could not avoid criticism for marrying someone much younger than him, and in such scandalous circumstances. But the good news was that, besides all the gossip, we also received support from a few close people who understood that everyone has the right to love and to be forgiven. The biggest conflict in my heart was my relationship with my father. Although he agreed to our marriage, I knew he had not truly forgiven me. My father no longer looked at me with the same pride as before. Instead, he looked at me with disappointment and distance. I knew I had hurt him, shattered the image he had hoped for me. In the first years after our marriage, my father and I rarely had deep conversations like before. But I kept trying. I was always by his side, helping him with everything around the house, and occasionally sharing the little joys of life. Gradually, the silence between us became less tense. Eventually, time helped my father and I mend our relationship, little by little, and I felt like I was reliving the good old days with him. As for Andrew, he kept his promise. He became a devoted husband, always there for me when I needed him, as compensation for everything we had been through. He was not only my lover but also my guide in life, helping me overcome my mistakes and grow from there. Thanks to his devotion and sincere love, I learned how to face myself, how to cherish every moment and love others with all my heart. Looking back, I realized that I had learned a lot. The torment and pain I went through were not only the price of my mistakes but also the journey for me to find myself. I learned that love is not always easy or simple. It may come in unexpected, even wrong circumstances, but it is from there that we realize the true value of forgiveness, patience and unconditional love. Finally, my story can end with a peaceful closure. My life with Andrew gradually stabilized. We had a home, although not perfect, but enough for both of us to feel happy. The storms passed, the mistakes were accepted, and we decided to build a new future together. I was no longer the weak and thoughtless girl of the early days, but became an adult, knowing the value of love and forgiveness. That was my journey, a painful journey but brought peace in the end, when I understood that life is never perfect, but it is from mistakes and difficulties that we can find the true meaning of love and happiness. After what I have experienced, I realized that love and relationships can be a source of strength, but can also easily become a place where we make mistakes. If there is one piece of advice I want to give everyone, it is to always hold on to your own values and principles. No matter what the circumstances, do not let your emotions get carried away and forget what is right. Most importantly, learn to face your mistakes honestly and courageously. Sometimes, admitting your mistakes and finding ways to fix them will bring greater peace than trying to hide them. At the same time, cherish those who love you and do not let blindness or a moment of weakness destroy those precious things. Finally, learn to forgive yourself and others. Only when we know how to be tolerant can we find true happiness.